I'm a guy who has owned bird dogs for 3 decades and made most of the mistakes that you can make. I haven't made them all yet, but I just hadn't had enough time. There's some of those books, there's stuff in them that I would never do with dogs, but it doesn't diminish my curiosity. I feel like there's always maybe a little something you can pick up. I've really kind of gotten interested in more of the mental side, because that's something I do have the space and time to do. It's all right there. What are the mistakes that I as an owner am making that I can avoid if I'm just aware of them? People just talk too much. They just don't shut up. I mean, there's just like yabber, 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 talking to their dog the whole time. Try to go an entire day without speaking to your dogs. Just communicating to them with body language. It's amazing how much you can communicate without saying a word. I think that was one of the last things that Ben Williams said to me when I was talking to him for that article. What is the one thing people should remember? And he's like, oh, that's easy. You should remember to have fun. It's too easy to get frustrated if you go out, oh, there's no birds. This is awful. Oh, I missed everything I shot at. This is awful. You had the chance to go out and do it. That's not awful. It's a pretty good deal. We're lucky to be able to do these kind of things.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of GDIY. Joined with me in person, Mark Coleman. Mark, how we doing?
Doing great. Good to see you today.
Yeah, I'm excited that we're finally able to make this happen. I know this has been kind of a long time coming, because I know you reached out to me about a year ago now, if not even longer, and just kind of checking in. You listened to some episodes and you kind of gave me some suggestions, and then you really kind of more or less linked me up with Martha Greenlee, which eventually led into Mo Lindley. And then it's so you kind of were the catalyst for a lot of episodes, and I knew that we were going to circle back and do something together because you've written a couple of interesting articles in a couple different magazines. So I'm excited to pick your brain. But first, how was it behind the scenes getting to see all this magic and cluster of everything getting set up and to record a podcast? It's a bit of a headache, isn't it?
You really ought to take one of these cameras and flip it around so everybody can see what we got going on here. It's eye-opening. Didn't realize there was that much that went into video and sound production.
Well, that's just it. We've been doing the audio podcast for a number of years, kind of have that down pat. It's pretty straightforward, but then you start adding in the video mix. This is the first time doing video on the road. And then what's really interesting is you learn something new every time you break all this stuff out, stuff that you're going to apply to other episodes down the road. But we could not figure out what the heck was giving us the feedback on the audio. We just kept hearing this ringing and buzzing. So anybody that has an underground fence in the backyard, understand if you're going to try and do some recording and you get some feedback, check your underground fence.
Go unplug it. Yeah, solved it.
So how long have you had that underground fence, the electric fence?
It was here when we bought the house 17 years ago. Mm. And I mentioned to you I had some doubts that whether it would keep my dog at the time in the yard. I had 2 at the time. And, man, once they get trained on it, which only takes a couple of days, they really respect that fence. I told you we have deer running through the woods over here. They'll go right up to the edge of the woods, but they'll stop. They'll bark at the deer, run up and down, but they won't cross over.
That's interesting. Yeah, you mentioned that, and of course, while we were out before finally hitting record on this, we were letting the dogs run, and we let my dogs out to air out, and they're doing the typical dog thing. But it was really funny watching my young one Quinn realize that yours couldn't go past a certain spot in the driveway, and it's amazing how fast these dogs learn, especially mine. Like, they have no idea what an underground electric fence is, and I know plenty of people use them out there. It's interesting to see how truly effective they were. So you haven't had any issues with them just and like really gritting their teeth and just running through it?
The only time I mentioned this to you, I think when my dogs have gotten older, 14, 15 years old, pretty old, they seem to stop recognizing where that barrier is, and they'll just walk right through it. And, it doesn't matter how high you set it. If they decide they're going, they'll just wander on through it. And once they're through it, they're fine. They won't come back in. But they seem to stop respecting it when they get really old. And if it snows, kind of change, and we don't have that problem a lot around here, but it changes the visual. I think they'll try it some then. If the power goes out, like ice storm, snowstorm, that's when I've had them get out. But any other time, it works really, really well.
I'm curious why the older dogs may stop respecting it. I'm wondering if does it give like an auditory warning
It
before?
does.
Okay, so I'm wondering if they're just not hearing it and they're going, and then maybe the stem just isn't high enough for them to really recognize it. It's kind of an interesting.
I think it's something along those lines because it does beep several yards before they're going to get a shock.
Okay.
And if the older dogs can't hear that, they're getting shocked, and either they turn around or they just keep going. And then once you get past it, it shuts off.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't shock them all the way down the street. So it's
All right.
it probably has something to do with the lack of hearing. But old dogs, they start to just lose their bearings in a lot of ways, and
Yeah.
Well,
again, you learn something new every time. Electric fences, I'm not that familiar with it, but now we know old dogs and not good for recording here or around.
Yeah.
But yeah, so back to my previous point is we say all the time, listeners kind of give us suggestions or feedback, and I truly mean that in terms of I'm always after the next best topic, the next best guest, and you obviously suggested a number of them, and you've really, when we're here, I'm at your place in South Carolina, we're in your study, and I'm looking at all the books, and of course, us dog people, we have so many of kind of similar books on the shelf, but you also have a ton that I'm not familiar with, and it's really interesting kind of getting to know some of your background and not just the books that you've read, but all of the trainers that have had an impact or influence on you that you've gotten to not only meet in person, but actually train with or even hunt with. Kind of give us an overview of all the people that have kind of influenced you since you've been in the dog space.
I was fortunate, I think, and this is just one of those, better lucky than good kind of things. My first Brittany, who I got almost 30 years ago, some friends of mine owned a female, and they said, if you find a male to breed her to, you can have one of the puppies. I said, great. So, a series of phone calls. I'm trying to find somebody who's got a good male. And several phone calls lead me to a guy named Maurice Lindley, Mo. He had a male Brittany at the time that he was using as a stud dog some. I think he even bred Brittany's for a little while there. And that's how I met Mo. And I got a dog out of that litter. Mo trained that dog, and I've known him for a long time. And he's an hour down the road, so he's been very convenient, very accessible. I don't know how things might have turned out differently for me if he hadn't been in the picture, since I had that first dog. I don't know. It's hard to say. But obviously having a guy like that, who wants to help people, wants to spend time with them, wants you to ask questions. It's not just taking your dog to him to be trained. Going over there and spending time with him and seeing how he does things and getting him to help you with problems that you have. Invaluable. So all the, more than anybody else, probably Mo. Mm-hmm. But I've had my dogs off with some other trainers over the years in the summers to work them on wild birds, which we don't really have around here, at least to the extent that you can train dogs in the summer on lots of them. I sent the older dog that I have now up to Canada with Calvin Davis one summer, and so learned a little bit from him that summer. The younger dog I have 2 summers ago went out to North Dakota with Doug Ray. I don't know if you know Doug. His dad, Harold Ray, owned probably the most famous setter, Tomoka. Trained and handled and campaigned that dog, bred that dog. So guys like that, I've really gotten to pick up some things from that maybe I wouldn't have picked up just staying around here.
Yeah.
And then, books, videos, whatnot. There's just tons of books out there that you can get little pieces from all these guys.
Yeah. I find it real interesting that, as you were just talking about, you're sending your dogs off because, like you said, unfortunately, it is what it is down here in the southeast. We have some birds, but how much time and how much effort can you really put forth into finding the wild birds down here has become the question. And somebody that keeps up and at least studies the dog training and living with dogs and hunting with dogs as much as you are, but you're still sending your dog off to other trainers, kind of break that down for me and put it into terms of somebody listening to this, like, well, why do I need to study how to train dogs or get in the mindset of training these dogs if I'm going to pay and send the dog off to a pro trainer?
Because that trainer's not going to keep that dog forever.
Right.
It's you're going to get that dog back at some point.
Yeah.
And I'm not a pro trainer. I will never be a pro trainer. I'm a guy who has owned bird dogs for 3 decades and made most of the mistakes that you can make. I haven't made them all yet, but I just hadn't had enough time. Eventually that dog's going to come back to you, and you gotta figure out how to not undo the work that all those professional trainers do. And you're going to make mistakes. Everybody is going to make mistakes with dogs. But there's thinking that you're going to get, kind of an automated machine back from a trainer is a huge mistake some people make. That's a living, breathing animal with a sense of its own and a mind of its own. And it's not something you're just going to push the button on and it's going to do what it's supposed to do. Mm-hmm. Things will go wrong. Some of them may not be your fault. Some of them may be your fault. So you really have to learn how to handle situations like that and what to do once you get that dog back from the trainer.
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy for somebody to get into this world. They get the dog and they just say, well, I don't have the time, the knowledge, the desire. Sometimes let's just call a spade a spade. Some guys just don't even want to train their own dogs, which is fine, each their own. But if you send your dog off for a 2-month, work on this, study the dog up or whatever, after 2 months, there's 10 more months in the year.
Yeah.
And, some people are perfectly fine sending their dog off for, knocking the rust off or a refresher or something every single year right before hunting season. But if you want to maintain the standard or even build off of that, you're going to have to spend some time yourself doing it, because these dogs are smart. They're going to learn that, Doug may require this of me in North Dakota, but Dad here down in South Carolina, that's not the case. They don't even require the same corrections. And I mean, how many of the pro trainers have we heard, as soon as they get the dogs back from the owners, those dogs are, we're back here again. Mm-hmm. We do this again. It doesn't take long for them to knock the rust off. And the pro trainers are sitting there like they're collecting the check every year. Keeps some guys in business. Mm-hmm. I know that. But it is just as important whether you're sending them off or not. Either way, you still need to know, if anything else, how to live with the dog and just how the day-to-day interaction with them can influence what you've already paid a trainer to put on that dog.
Yeah. And a lot of people, especially first-time dog owners, don't recognize that you are always training a dog. Whether you think you are or not, you are conditioning behavior in that dog by what you allow and what you don't allow, how you react to things that they do. And if you're not aware of that, that's how things just start going sideways right out of the gate. I have a friend who got a new dog about a year ago. This is not a hunting dog. This is just a family dog. But we were talking about what the experience was like, and she said that one thing somebody told her early on was, everything that dog does, you have to decide then, always or never. Are you always going to allow this dog to do this, or are you never going to allow this dog to do this? You can get into exceptions later on, but if you don't ever want that dog on the furniture, you can't start letting them get on the furniture. Sometimes, not all the time. they have trouble with that, drawing that
Yeah.
distinction. So
No, that's a very good point, especially with people maybe more often than not their first dogs, but I've seen some people on their 20th dog
yeah,
still making the same mistake to where they anthropomorphize the dogs to where they think dogs think of things the same way we do in the same light. Logically, that they're going to deduce that, oh, only when dad's in the room
right,
watching TV am I allowed on the couch.
yeah,
But then, they get upset when they come in the living room and the dog's on the couch and dad's not in there watching TV, right?
yeah,
It's always or never, and it really is that black and white to the dog. And we talk, especially, I've had guys on the podcast over the years, more ways than not, they're essentially saying remove all gray area
mm-hmm.
from the dog. It's not only going to help your day-to-day lifestyle with the dog, but it's also just more fair to the dog. It's not fair to the dog to where you're allowed on the couch tonight but not tomorrow. It's that's how you kind of get the dogs always kind of looking at you nervous. Am I allowed to do this or am I
Mm-hmm.
not? Is he going to be upset this time or is he not?
Yeah.
What's the main challenge that you found keeping dogs up to a certain level after sending them off? Because like you said, you've learned some things from these pro trainers. Because like how important of it is it to do things the same way that the pro trainers did it? Does that make sense?
It's pretty important. It's pretty important. If you start kind of making up ways to do it on your own, you might get lucky and some of them work, and you might not. But it kind of goes back to what you just said. What is the dog expecting from you? And they knew what to expect from that pro trainer, because that pro trainer is not going to let them dig holes on the chain gang some of the time, or bark on the chain gang some of the time. Not going to let them do things sometimes and not other times. It's always or never with them. And if you can bring that same expectation back to the house when you get the dog home, so they know what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. Mentally, for a dog, it's comforting. They know where they stand. They know what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. They don't give you that look you were talking about of, should I try? Am I going to get away with it this time? And it's, I find myself a lot of times, dog's doing something I don't want to do. I'm like, I just don't freaking feel like dealing with this right now.
Yeah.
And so you're just like, all right, I'm just going to let them do it. I don't have time. I'm on my way to work. I can't, all right, I'll deal with this later. Well, you've kind of conditioned them that there are times they can get away with it.
Yeah.
And so if they like doing it, why not try it? They might get away with it.
Yeah.
It's frustrating for both of you.
And that's where, the typical advice of if you don't have the time or the attention to give that dog in that moment, it's better off to have them in the kennel or put up to where they don't have that opportunity to get away with something, because you may not think of it in the light of you're letting the dog get away with something, but that's essentially what you're trying to do. And I've found myself, it's not really so much the time, it's like when I'm focused in on a task, I'm doing something else and maybe my dogs are with me or they're just in the backyard and I'm working over here, to where like I'll repeat myself without even recognizing or realizing I'm repeating myself just because I'm focused on another task. And so, we all want to spend time with our dogs, but sometimes you just don't have the full on mental focus to apply to them. And then, that's been my mistake more often when it's just me, but then you start bringing in the family to it as well. I'm interested because obviously you have a family, you're married with kids and everything. That's a struggle that I'm still having with, especially with my young girl is just 3 years old. The keep maintaining the standard or the boundaries within the family. Do you have any advice when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think you kind of have to make a decision early on how much of a hard ass you're going to be about that. Obviously, you don't want kids and or spouses doing certain things behavior wise, allowing the dogs to do things that you don't want them to do. They can undo a fair amount of discipline training unknowingly. It's not like they're waiting until I'm off at work so they can go mess up the dog. They're not trying to. They just
Mm-hmm.
want to love on the dog and play with the dog and all that. Um, where do you want to draw the line there? As my kids have gotten older, they're 16 and 18 now. They understand there are certain things you do and you don't do. But when they're young, 3, 4, 5, man, it's hard
Yeah.
because they just want to love on the dogs. The
Yeah.
dogs are part of the family. They just they're not trying to undo anything I've done deliberately.
Yeah.
Um,
My little one, she's ate up with dogs. She loves dogs, which is great. We want
yes,
that,
yes,
but it's also frustrating and sometimes to where we've had just very simple rules. Again, I mean, if it's got to be black and white for dogs, it's got to be black and white for children as well. And so something as simple as like we don't mess or with the dogs while they're eating
yeah,
or they're on their dog bed is a huge one. But she's now at that age to where she's she likes to dress up the dogs, right? And so she's
yeah,
always the dogs are on the dog bed, and next thing you know, you're looking over there, and she's trying to drape, what have you,
uh huh,
all over the dogs, and it's
yeah,
hard not to get frustrated because you don't want to diminish their enthusiasm for the dogs,
yeah,
but at the same time, like you're just asking for trouble if you don't maintain that boundary. I mean, even not from a standpoint of just ruining any potential training that you have in the dog, but for safety
yeah,
reasons, obvious reasons as
yeah,
well,
yeah.
to where everybody's has that dog that's never done it until they do it.
Until they do it. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so besides Mo, you were telling me some stories that you've been around Delmar Smith here and
Yeah.
there too. I don't think that you necessarily trained with him,
No.
but I find it interesting that you're a Brittany guy. Brittany's are kind of a staple with Martha, and
Hmm.
and within the West method, there's a lot of Brittany's, but then the Smiths also have Brittany's. What is it about the Brittany? What was it about the Brittany that intrigued you that you've stuck with over the year? And I'm just kind of curious why all these people that have kind of been doing it for
Yeah.
so long, that there's something about the Brittany that kind of hooks them.
Do you want me to start a controversy here and just tell you that the Brittany's the best? It's that I told you that some friends of mine had a female that was a Brittany, um, and that dog was just a sweetheart of a dog. Lived in the house with them, like mine do when I'm at home. They're in the house. Um, Good disposition. Um, they could have had a short hair or a setter or something, and I probably would be a short hair owner now or a setter owner now. It's just that was the first dog that I had because of circumstances, and the dog just worked out great. He was a good hunting dog, was great around the house, and when it came time, I got another one and another one, and every time I get a new dog, I start thinking, man, maybe I've always been kind of curious about these small Munsterlanders. We were talking about that and what beautiful dogs they are, and very something just very appealing to me about those. And I was like, maybe I'll try one of those. And I just can't ever bring myself to do it. I just, I've kind of gotten used to Brittany's and how they are, and um, they just worked really well for me. So I hadn't strayed from that. As far as some of these other people like the Smiths. Um, and maybe some of the people involved in the West Method and Brittany's. I can't really explain it, why they were attracted to them and why they stuck with them so long, other than they've probably worked pretty well for them too. And
Yeah.
they just didn't have a reason to, to go off into some other breed. And some of them have, the Smiths obviously train a lot of different kinds of dogs. I know
Right.
Ronnie and Susanna, train a lot of pointers, probably own a lot of pointers, and still run a lot of pointers. So I think they've just found something in the Brittany that appeals to them as well, and that works for them.
Yeah. The first, whether that's dog breed or how you train a dog, it's really easy for people to kind of get in their corner with how they do things based on their first influence or their first impression. What again, so many people I talk to, they get the dog breed because that was the first bird dog they saw on the field or something.
Yep.
That's the first dog that they saw slam on point, and then all of a sudden that's how they picture it. But you can kind of say the same thing in terms of training methods. and just how many people have been doing things the same way for 20 years, or fill in the blank
Yeah.
with how many dogs, just because, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And so, while it worked on their first dog, maybe, or that's just how they learned, it's kind of like they stop the journey of trying to learn more or additional ways, or alternative ways, and they just kind of do the same method, which is fine if it makes sense to you, and it works, have at it. But I'm always after the cheat codes. I'm always
Yeah.
trying to figure out how to get better, how to improve, how can I mix this element of this method with that element, and come away with a better product. And I'm curious in regards to the Brittany was kind of the first impression for you. You said that Mo was a first
Hmm.
impression with you early on. Was that really impactful in regards to how you kind of look at dog training and trying to learn and stay as curious as you have, with obviously all the books that we were referencing
Yeah.
earlier?
Uh, I think just the general interest in dogs and hunting with those dogs is probably what keeps me interested. Um, Obviously, have read a lot of books over the years. Some of them, and we were thumbing through some of them earlier. Like there's some of those books, there's stuff in them that I would never do with dogs. Never
Right.
try with dogs. Wouldn't consider. There are other things that maybe they've worked for somebody, but I couldn't see them working for me necessarily. But it doesn't diminish my curiosity about how other people are doing it. I feel like there's always maybe a little something you can pick up. And just in the last maybe 5 years or 8 years or so, I've really kind of gotten interested in more of the mental side of dog training. Not being a professional trainer, there's techniques and all that stuff out there. You can learn some of that from the pros. I'm not set up to train my own dogs. I don't have the space or can't keep the birds and all that. So I'm happy to have Mo or somebody do that work for me. But the mistakes that we as dog owners make, that's really gotten my interest in the last handful of years, because that's something I do have the space and time to do. It's all right there. Um, in my head. So the more I can learn about that, and that's something you don't have to have one method of doing that. You can pull from different trainers and people who have had experience with dogs, in terms of what are the mistakes that I, as an owner, am making that I can avoid if I'm just aware of them, if I just
Hmm.
know about them. Yeah.
You went exactly where I was wanting to head to, because when somebody looks at all the dog books and all the trainers, I mean, you have everybody up here that anybody can recognize, from the Whaley to the Smiths to the Walters to
Yeah.
everybody, the Baileys. Everybody's up here on this wall, and something that I've gotten asked a few times on, from listeners, is from interviewing and kind of exploring and dabbling in all the different methods and trainers and approaches, how I go about trying to make up my mind on this. And what you're describing is, I call the common threads.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like every method is different. Everything is gonna kind of be appetizing to somebody in a different way, shape, or form. But I look for the common threads, to where if I can get you know these three methods and they all agree on this one little tidbit, then I know that, okay, that's a common element
Mm-hmm.
amongst all the methods, and so I know to concentrate on that. And one of the main common threads that kind of spans through the majority of them, whether it's actually called out or not, but it could just be built into the methods, is the mental side of things of the dog trainer. You can remove everything from every method, you're still left with the handler. And that's why it's so important that the mindset of that handler be focused and intentional, and they're never their first instinct isn't blaming the dog, it's always blaming themselves, to
Mm-hmm.
where if maybe you didn't do the right setup, or just we didn't anticipate this happening, or we overreact with the
Yeah.
dog and stuff like that. So the article that you wrote on the mentality, the mental shape, it really spoke to me on a number of different levels. And I think, a lot of people think that that's what they're doing when they go out there. But then how many times have you been in the field with somebody to where they go out with a game plan, and within 5 seconds, it's completely thrown out, and they didn't even recognize that it derailed that fast to where they're going to go out like, okay, I'm going to really pay attention to being silent. And then right out of the gate, it's like the dog goes left, and they're calling the dog to come right, and it's just like you 5 seconds, you couldn't keep your mouth shut for 5 seconds.
Yep. Yeah. It a lot of those books kind of give some lip service to the mental mistakes that dog owners make. They'll mention it, but you don't see whole chapters devoted to it. And I'm not sure why that is. Maybe people are just looking for, training techniques, and you need that too. Maybe pro trainers, it's just so intuitive to them what you do mentally that it doesn't occur to them that they need to train us as dog owners. In the things that we need to learn to look out for and to avoid. And you'll see a lot of trainers, when you go pick up your dog, they're going to go through some stuff with you. And some of that they do cover. But I'm amazed at how little there is out there on that. Ben Williams' book, Bird Dog, I think he calls it Bird Dog, the Instinctive Training Method. That covers it probably more than any of the other books I've read. And that article that I wrote about Ben, the conversations I had with him as I was putting that together, we spent a lot of time talking about some of those mistakes that people make. And, you mentioned it, first and foremost, came out of his mouth was people just talk too much. And you've been around people like that in the field. I have. They just don't shut up. I mean, they're just like gabber, 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 talking to their dog the whole time, trying to, and that dog doesn't understand but 3 or 4 words, maybe. But it's, that's intuitive to us as people. If I'm trying to get you to do something and you're not picking up on it, what do? I talk more. I explain it in a different way. And it's just, it's just instinct. We talk. We want to explain. We want to guide people with our words. And dogs, it's just not, they don't work with dogs. Mm-hmm. That does nothing but confuse them.
On 2 different tiers, and I don't think that a lot of people understand, where yes, the verbal, you just said it, the dog may understand 3 words out of the 500 that you threw at them, but also, what do we just do? Like, while you're describing this, you became animated, you started using your hands, you changed your body language and your position, right? And so every time we're getting verbal with the dog and we're getting frustrated, or our tone's changing and our demeanor's changing to where, like, we're saying one thing with our mouth and our body's saying something completely different. So you're kind of confusing them on multiple different levels, and you don't intend to on either. Right. And it's hard. We're verbal creatures. Yep. Dogs aren't. And so that's what we talk about. To train a dog, you really have to get in the mindset of the dog. And to your point earlier, like, the good trainers get that. They understand that. They assume that's built into the cake, and that everybody's kind of working from the same level. And that's just not the case when you're talking to true DIY trainers.
Yeah. And you'll hear a lot of the pro trainers say you have to think like a dog. You have to do this in a way the dog understands. But you really need to ask, what does that mean? What does the dog understand? What does the dog not understand? And that, I think, one of the most frustrating things for me as a new dog owner was when stuff doesn't go like it's supposed to. The frustration level grows quickly in a person. It's not supposed to be this way. Yeah. It's not supposed to happen like this. And so, what do? Start yelling, you run around, you chase the dog, it comes unraveled in a hurry. And that's the opposite of what you should be, when something is not going, unless the dog's life is in danger, the best thing to do is just not say anything. Not do anything. Let's just go back and let's start over. Let's
and that's so hard to do, to where, being silent is a great starting point. But this is something that I really focused on last year, was remaining silent, especially after my time with the aforementioned trainers, Rick
Yeah.
Smith, Martha, Mo, when you have all, everybody's kind of saying the same thing, you would be foolish not to take their advice. So I really, focused in on that. But what I realized is I was still getting frustrated because I didn't address what you just talked about, to where unfair expectations. We can sit here and do all the time, all the studying, the best plans, all of that stuff, to where it's just we're the mastermind drawing
Yeah.
out how we're going to build this perfect dog, and you build up those expectations. Then you go out in the field, and what I found was I was going out there and I still had the expectations built up in my head, and for the most part it would happen like you intend to. That's the beautiful part about being informed. But then you would have that session that just it comes unraveled. And what I realized was I was being quiet, but my body language and everything still showed my emotions, to where I'm still getting visibly upset. And that's where, you see it in some of these books, you hear it from some of the trainers that know better. Go put the dog up
Mm-hmm.
and just come back another day. It's like, I think even Mo said it on the episode I did with him, to where, it's just like, it's okay if the dog screws up. The biggest mistake we can make as dog owners is to think that dog screwed up just to piss us off.
Yeah, it's not personal with the dog. It's and it's not a race. It's not. You don't get more points if you get it perfect today. This you're going to have this dog for 10, 12, 15 years, hopefully. Especially when that dog is young. If something goes wrong, it's okay that he didn't get it perfect today. You got tomorrow. You got the next day to work on this. You've got years to work on this. Just don't let it undo you that day. And you were talking about talking and body language. I don't know if you've ever tried this. I did this. I should say I did it once. I tried it 3 or 4 times before I got it right. But something interesting. Try to go an entire day without speaking to your dogs, like not a word. And the first 3 days I tried it, it was over in 10 minutes. It's just such a reflex. You talk to them. Hey, let's go outside. Hey, y'all want something to eat? Come on, let's. It's such a reflex. And finally, if you can get past the morning, that you're really not that awake in the morning. You're kind of running on autopilot anyway. And that's when I was, 10 minutes in, it was over. But I made it a day without talking to my dogs. It was really interesting, just communicating to them with body language, waving to them, clapping my hands. And it's amazing how much you can communicate without saying a word to your dogs. Mm-hmm. And they pick up on it. You start walking a certain direction, wave your hand, or just look over your shoulder, they'll follow you. You don't need to have all this conversation with them, but try it sometime. It's very eye-opening for me, very educational.
Yeah. And after reading your article last year, after you sent it, I actually did try again.
Yeah.
I focused in on this last year after seeing just the way words don't make a difference, and nothing is true when you're in the field with somebody that highly relies on verbal way too much. But we were talking about it. In our short time here, we've seen numerous examples between our dogs of just how they learn by association, and how just being in a new place has changed them, to where, Quinn, the setter, you saw her all of a sudden start freaking out. Why was she freaking out in the kennel? Like excited freak out. Yeah. Because she heard me on top of the storage compartment, and whenever I go in there, I'm pulling out the shotgun or the vest. She thinks we're going hunting, right?
She knows, yeah.
And we were just in the truck for a good long while. Road trip, I'm all of a sudden digging around in the box. She's excited. She thinks we're going hunting. And then the fact that, like, Quinn, out of all 3 of my dogs, is probably the most reliable on this, to where she doesn't go in or out of doors and thresholds without you releasing her and giving her name. Well, we let her out. They're airing out. Next thing you know, your wife came out and said that she had just ran right into the house. And I'm just like, well, sorry. Yeah. But completely new place, new scenario, new people, new smells, all that stuff, to where I could get frustrated with her in that instance. But really, when you stop and think about it, it's just like, well, I shouldn't have let her just run around unsupervised like that. It comes back to me. But the silent challenge for a full day, I would encourage anybody listening to this to try it, and you will realize, or at least I I would think that you're going to realize odds are you're not going to miss a beat. Those dogs don't need you
Yeah,
to verbalize
at
anything
all,
at all.
like at all. They don't. I've the simple disciplinary type commands I have with my dogs. Sit. I overlaid a hand signal with that so that I could. One day they're not going to be able to hear. If they live long enough, they're going to be deaf anyway. So they need a few hand signals. But I'd hold my finger up and they sit. And honestly, they will sit more quickly if I just stop what I'm doing and hold my finger up than if I'm going sit. And they're wagging their tails. They know they're getting ready to get fed or come inside. They're coming undone. If you just calm down, they'll sit. They don't need you to tell them to sit. Just hold the finger
It's
up.
funny you say that, Rachel. My older one, she has no issues with her hearing right now, but I have been noticing over the past year she does respond quicker to hand signals that I never taught a hand signal.
Yeah.
But like if I look at her now, and it kind of is annoying to me to where like feeding time. Like
Yeah.
I don't like them up in my space while I'm getting their food in the bowl, so I'll give them a place command. And for whatever reason, she just stopped responding to the verbal altogether. Whereas before, I could be scooping dog food and I could be like, Rachel, place, and she goes to her bed or mat or whatever's in the area. Here lately, I have to actually point to a specific bed or mat, and then she goes and does it. And I'm just like, that's weird that 8 years we don't have this problem. Now all of a sudden, like she needs a hand signal and her hearing's fine.
Yeah.
I'm trying to decide how much I actually care about this right
Yeah.
now or not, but it's interesting, something I've picked up over the past few months to where why all of a sudden does she have to have the hand signal? And I'm sure I've built it up over time. Or
Do you think you were over time? When you were telling her place, you were also
I was
pointing your
probably
hand,
doing
so
that to where now
she'd
all
learn
of a
the hand
sudden,
signal that
yeah,
way?
the verbal means nothing, and the hand signal is what she cues off of. So again, it's just like, okay, I wish I could go back in time and notice that, but I'm sure that had to have been it. To where now it's just like the verbal doesn't have any meaning to her, but the point and the direction does, and I don't know.
A lot of you see a lot of people, even pro trainers, will begin certain types of obedience training with treats, food, things like that, and then they'll slowly just take the treat away, and the dogs, they learn the obedience, and they'll do it without the treat, and maybe that's some of what's going on. She doesn't need the verbal anymore; just the hand signal is enough.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. But I mean, dogs are dogs, right? And that's just part of it. To where again, like I said, like I can go fix that. Now I'm trying to decide how much do I actually care.
Right.
I can point just as easily as I can say something. But it's just a good example of this to where just go a full day. I've challenged people not even a full day, just go a full training session in the field.
Yeah.
And when it's just out front in front of them, that's really when it starts clicking with them. They didn't realize that they spoke so much. And then I've been in the field with some people that just, I want to talk to my dog. There is an element of that to where, old school trialers, sing to your dog.
Yeah.
It's hard to argue with somebody like that to where, you want to sing to your dog or talk to your dog. It's your dog, have at it. But then don't, in the same session, don't get upset when the dog is blowing off your 15th whoa.
Yeah. But and the singing has a purpose behind it. It's a directional.
Come with me.
Yeah. It's letting the dog know where the handler is, or if the dog needs to change direction. It's just kind of a way of communicating that in the field. And I will, I'll turn my dogs in the field by saying, "Hey, this way," or "Come on," whatever. If they're not looking at you, it's a good way to get them to swing around and work with you.
Right.
But if there's really no more than you need. You don't need to tell them whoa.
No.
And if you spend some time around pro trainers in the field, you'll see how little they talk, especially somebody like Mo. He's deaf anyway, so the talking really, he can see that it serves no purpose. And
Exactly.
the verbal commands that he gives are almost always, a come with me type command, just trying to get the dog's attention. Let's go this way. That's it. I
Yeah.
mean, you'll never hear him say, "Whoa, look out," or "Careful." None of that stuff. He lets the bird teach the dog, and the bird can teach the dog better than we can, really.
Yeah.
So watch a pro trainer sometime in the field and see how much or how little they actually say when they're working dogs.
Absolutely. Being silent is probably the number one go to, like when you start thinking about just easy mistakes that us as handlers make. But what are some of the other more common issues that you've kind of seen that handlers make, whether they realize it or not?
I think one that new owners make a lot, and I know I made it, is timelines, time frames. Hunting season's coming up. I don't care when you got that dog during the year. Hunting season is X weeks or months away, and you want that dog finished by opening day.
Right.
I mean, you got your new dog, and I want this dog ready to go and finished and, broke, steady to wing and shot and, retrieving it by opening day. That's going to get you in trouble. It's just
goes back to the expectations.
A lot of it is expectations, and another mental mistake people make is setting their expectations beyond what's realistic. Now, if they don't know what's realistic, you can't really fault them for that. But you're listening to this podcast. I'm gonna tell you right now, if this is your first dog, don't expect everything to go perfectly. Don't expect to have this dog finished, by opening day. You might get lucky, and there are dogs just like people that learn very fast. There are dogs like my younger one out here that learn very slowly. Now he learns once he's got it in his head, it's in there. It's just taking him a long time to learn some of these things. 4 months to force fetch. That's a long time to get a dog, and he's still not 100% reliable. So we're gonna have to finish that up in the spring. But be careful with those timelines that you set. If you go to a pro trainer, and I see this all the time when I'm hanging around at Moe's on Saturday, somebody shows up with their first dog, maybe the second question out of their mouth is, how long is it going to take before he's trained? And Mo always gives them the same answer. I can't tell you. I don't know. I'll have a better idea once we get into this a little bit and see how your dog is learning. But and some of the trainers now, they're kind of giving the market what it wants. A 3-month package to get your dog to this point. I would hope that those trainers, if they get into it and see this dog just isn't going to make it, they're just going to be honest with the owner and say, look, your dog's learning a little more slowly. We might not get there in 3 months.
Right.
But I think, especially for a new dog owner, it's dangerous to try to put an arbitrary timeline in your head and say, all right, we're going to finish this by this date. We're going to finish this dog up. Steady broke by this date. It takes as long as it takes, and you need to let it unwind.
And that's a big challenge, especially whether you're going to a pro trainer or not, with signing up for a test or trial, a hard date for obviously results. Like hunting is one thing. Like, I know plenty of people. I want my dog to have X, Y, and Z before we go hunting. I see that, but also at the same time, like hunting is a season, so you'll be like, well, we didn't quite make it, but give it another couple weeks and we'll be ready. And they're still hunting for a couple months usually. The time I see people making that error is really based around testing or trialing, because it's a hard date, and the results stem from that actual training or that task or that skill. And so I've been guilty of it before. I've spoken about it on the podcast a few times with my Muncie, to where, I utility tested her at 18 months old.
Yeah.
We got through it. We did it. But I still think that it took something out of her. And some dogs are perfectly fine really hitting the gas and going forward. And you can argue that that's part of genetics. That's part of, where you bought the dog, and it's all kind of built into the pie. But there are other dogs and other lines to where to really hit that gas button, that gas pedal, you're going to take something out of that dog at some point getting to that level. And if you don't have that hard date then it's not a big deal. But the challenge is NAVD is a great example, and I'm not picking on NAVD, but you have to plan so far out ahead to sign up for that test that it's hard not to put that date on the
Yeah.
calendar, so to speak, especially with how fast tests fill up. So I get why people
Hmm.
do it, but be careful about, don't be afraid to withdraw from the test if your dog's not ready, rather than hitting the gas pedal. It's like, well, maybe we just test next year. Because really, at the end of it, does it really matter
Yeah.
that much to us? I mean, some people it does, like that's their business. But for most of us DIY trainers, and we're supposed to be doing this just
Yeah.
for fun, it really doesn't change anything for us.
It's not the end of the world if you push it off to the next test date. It might be disappointing for you, but it's grand scheme of things, what's the difference really? Versus the damage you might do to that dog by pushing it too hard. And if you look at people, um, they start kids off roughly the same in kindergarten. Everybody's kind of in the same class doing the same stuff. By first and second grade, they're starting to separate kids based on how fast they're picking the material up. And a lot of times people say, well, the smarter kids are in the advanced class. The kids who are just learning the material more quickly than others. I have a number of friends who were not in the AP classes in high school, all the advanced classes, but they've been incredibly successful. So it's not one smarter than the other. It's just people learning at a different pace. And some people learn at a slower pace than others. Doesn't mean that they're not smart and they're not ultimately going to be successful. But if you take those kids at an early age and push them into that accelerated learning class, they're going to get frustrated. They're going to shut down on you. Their grades are going to be awful. It's not going to be good for their self-esteem when they're getting an F on every single test. Let them learn at a rate that they can absorb the material. That's where the benefit is to them, because they're learning the material. It doesn't matter how fast. And it's the same with dogs.
Yeah.
I understand there are certain situations where people need, maybe this is what they do for a living or something. They need to have a dog ready by a certain date. In almost every other case, it's just not. I mean, you have time. You're going to have this dog for a long time. Don't get caught up in, I got to have this done by this date.
Yeah.
Just let that dog learn at the pace that it naturally wants to learn.
Well, and I mean, if we're gonna stay on the comparison to how we learn and us as people, we also all learn different ways. Some people are more audible,
Yeah.
some more people are more visual, more people. I mean, I learned the best way by this right here: engaged conversation. If you put me in front of a video or listening to something, I'm gonna take in certain things,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not gonna be to where I can recall it or pull from it as well, right?
Right.
So I learn best by either listening or watching something and then discussing it in detail and really kind of diving in on it, and then it'll kind of solidify. And so you take that to where we can kind of logically infer and pull things out or extrapolate things by how things are presented. We say all the time, every dog is different as well. So some dogs can learn quicker or faster under this method. I think that most dogs with enough reps and the right patience can learn things anyway on any of these major methods. I think all of these methods are proven enough to where you could, quote unquote, works on every dog. I think that's true to a certain level, but it might take 10 times the amount of reps for this
Mm-hmm.
type of dog rather than the other. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying that you have to adjust every single dog to a different type of method, but also I think that's where the value in really kind of rounding out your knowledge of dog training, to where if you know this trick or this just slight adjustment, you might be able to get through to that dog in half the number of reps and maintain a certain level of confidence or enthusiasm throughout the process. And that's ultimately like what keeps driving me to figure these things out, to where we say it all the time, but I think it just kind of falls on deaf ears at this point, to where every dog is different, just like we are. And, we have to make this make sense to the dog. So That's kind of where I come at it on all of this stuff is you can't put a timetable because there's too much unknown into it. I know the word nuance gets thrown around a lot, but it is kind of true.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for a new dog owner
Yes.
because unless you have kind of been in that space for a while without a dog and hung around with friends who have them, gone with them to training days or to see their dog work by a pro trainer, um, you're not going to be that familiar with the methods. I mean, you can read the books and you'll have some kind of working knowledge, but in terms of whether that's going to work for you and your dog, you don't really know until you get that dog and you actually get your hands
Get
on it
going.
and start trying it, start doing it. Um, so it's tough, I think, for a new dog owner to say, well, I'm going to use this method unless they have spent that time and done the research and okay, here's one that really makes a lot of sense to me. I feel like I understand this better than any of these other methods. Well, then you got to go find somebody who can really teach you how to do that method. That's a whole another obstacle. But I it's I think that's the toughest for a new owner. Somebody who's been in it for a while and been exposed to a lot of them with a lot of different dogs. It's a lot easier to make that decision of this makes the most sense to me and works the best for my dogs.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Do you have any tips for that new owner figuring out which method is the right one for them? Because generally, when I'm asked that, I'm like, look, you just kind of have to explore it, and then you kind of know it when you come across it if it makes sense to you or not. Do you have anything else besides that right there to where again, that's all I have is like, does it make sense to you? Like, can you understand it? Because what I'm saying, it can be dangerous for a new owner to where if you start trying to mix and match methods and you don't really fully understand all the methods. I'm a firm believer, especially when you're first starting out. I think it is safest to pick one method and follow it from start to finish rather than trying to pick the common threads because you just haven't been in the world long enough. But do you have any other tips for matching up the correct method for you and your dog?
I think the best thing that a new owner or somebody maybe who has never owned a dog but is thinking about getting one, the best thing that person can do is to talk to as many people as possible who own dogs, who train dogs. Go to seminars, even if you don't have a dog. Just invest a little time and money and go to a seminar and just watch and ask questions. That's the purpose of those seminars, is to learn. So if something doesn't make sense to you, don't be bashful. Raise your hand and say, hey, I don't have a dog. I'm just trying to learn about this. That makes sense to me. Explain that to me. And you'll be surprised how willing dog owners and trainers are to help people who don't come in there acting like they know everything. I mean, it's pretty obvious. If you're new to this and you act like you have all the answers, it's obvious to the people who've been in it for a long time that you don't have any of the answers. And we were talking about my friend Lauren Gwynn earlier. Lauren and I were talking a year or so ago about somebody he's pretty new to the whole bird dog thing. Maybe only been in it a couple of years, but really kind of wants to portray to the outside world that he's been doing this for a while and he is an expert in this. And
Were y'all talking about me?
no, we were not talking. I'm not going to say who it was. We were not talking about you. But Lauren said something that was just, to me, it was just so wise and so simple. And I've carried it with me a lot. She said, it's okay to be new at something. And it really is. You don't have to make people think you're an expert if you're not. They're going to be more willing to help you if you come in and say, I don't have any idea what I'm doing here. People are going to jump to help you. If you come in and kind of tell them how much you know, they're going to be like, all right, man, you know it all. You just go do it. Keep doing it your way.
Mm-hmm.
Come back to us when it doesn't work, maybe. But you don't have to act like you are an expert in it if you're brand new. Be humble, and there is it goes back to ego, I think. But when you're new, and I know when I had my first dog, I didn't want to be like the new guy out there in the field with everybody. I wanted them to think maybe I knew a little about what I was doing. They can tell. They can
Yeah.
look at you and tell whether you know what you're doing or not. So just acknowledge it. Hey guys, this is my first dog. I'm new. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Y'all, if I'm doing something wrong, tell me. Tell me and explain it. I want to learn, and people want to help you.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it was a year or two ago. I read Ryan Holiday did. I think it was called "Ego is the Enemy" book, and ultimately, the point that he was driving through, it was amazing how he wrote an entire book on just like don't have an ego.
Yeah.
You would think that that's pretty common knowledge, but you really can't learn or progress in anything until you put the ego in check.
Yeah.
And we're all guilty of having ego in some way, shape, or form and different elements. And so it's hard to kind of tell people like, hey, check the ego. But that's ultimately like when you don't really truly learn something in any regards, regardless of which, not just dog training, but life in general, until you're willing to accept and say, I don't know this.
Yeah.
You then can't figure out and learn that. And I tell everybody, like, I'm not one of those people. I don't say there's no such thing as dumb questions. I think there are dumb questions. But if you have that dumb question, you will remain dumb until you ask it, right?
Right.
And so, like, check
Right.
the ego, still ask the dumb question. You can even acknowledge, like, look, I'm sure that this is probably a dumb question, but what does everybody say? Like, oh, no, like, and then they explain it, right? And so don't be afraid to ask the question to anybody in the field. And I mean, heck, I've been doing it for 4.5 years where I've asked some pretty dumb questions listening back on
But
this.
you're asking questions.
But I'm asking them, and then I don't have to ask that question or have that thought later on. Another thing that I think outside of just the ego, because we can preach to everybody about ego all day long outside of the dog training world too. But another thing, and I've been guilty of this a number of times, and it kind of falls into stuff that we've already spoken about in terms of the in terms of the expectations. I think it kind of falls in line with this is keeping it fun. You hammered this on your article as well as this is supposed to be fun. I've said it on my podcast too. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. There's been numerous times where I've gone out and I'm not having that much fun.
Yeah.
But thinking back on it is it's always tied to those expectations or those deadlines. Everything that we've already talked about, it putting that stuff out there to where like, you put your ego on to where like, okay, instead of us working or training dogs, now we're trying to show off dogs.
Yeah.
There's always an underlying reason why we're not having fun, but the point in the matter for me is if you check your ego, if you go out there just to run the dogs and you're training the dog in front of you, not the dog that you planned back in the planning stage, and you're letting everything unfold, you come out of the field exponentially enjoying your time with your dog compared to the other way around. Why do you think that people lose the fun in this as much as they do?
I think it goes right to the heart of what you said. Is they have certain expectations that their dog is going to perform a certain way when they go in the field. There are people who want to go out and shoot a limit every time, and if you live somewhere where there are enough birds to do that, maybe that's a reasonable expectation. But should it be? There are so many things you can't control in that scenario. You can't control what kind of day your dog's going to have. And you might have a really, really good bird dog. But Tiger Woods is a really, really good golfer. And he doesn't win every tournament. Even in his heyday. He won a lot, but he didn't win every tournament. Your dog is really an athlete just like any professional athlete. And they don't have their best day every single day. They do have spectacular days from time to time, and you tend to remember those. And maybe that's too bad because you tend to think, man, that you ought to be doing that every time. And they're going to have off days. They're going to have days where maybe they're just not feeling it, or maybe they're the scent. We don't know anything about scent really in the grand scheme of things.
It's called scent theory for a reason.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe they're just not smelling it that day. Maybe they're just not focused that day. But this happens, and you need to understand that, and give the dog a break, give yourself a break. You go back to the fun thing. I think that was one of the last things that Ben Williams said to me when I was talking to him for that article. I said, what is the one thing people should remember? And he's like, oh, that's easy. You should remember to have fun. And he said, when I was a high school basketball coach, I told my teams that, everybody wants to win, and winning is nice, but you need to have fun. You're not going to really perform at your best if you're not enjoying being out there doing practice or competing in the game. It needs to be fun. It doesn't need to become drudgery. It doesn't need to become, every day is not a contest that you measure your performance and your dog's performance by. You're going to come away disappointed a lot. For most of us, those of us who are not professional trainers and handlers, we don't make money doing this. This is how we spend our free time, which, for a lot of people, unless they're retired maybe, we don't have a lot of free time. We sure don't need to be spending our free time all pissed off because stuff didn't go the way we wanted it to go. If you're not having fun while you're out there, you're doing something wrong. I don't know what it is. It's probably different for everybody, but you're doing something wrong. And it probably in some way, shape, or form goes back to those expectations. And
that's 100% it for me. Whether it's hunting or training, it's all expectations. If I'm going out hunting and I have this whole thing in my head to where like today's the day, it's perfect conditions, cloudy, not too cloudy, like the sun's still out, like the thermal, like I can play it into my head to where I can make it like we should come away with this. But I can't think of another thing in life that you hear all the time, quality over quantity. But yet in the hunting space, so many people are real quick to, stack the tailgate and get and get a limit. And don't get me wrong, I'm out there to hunt if the opportunity presents itself and the dogs are doing what they're supposed to do and everything. Like, yes, absolutely, I want to shoot a limit just as much as the next person. But I've said it numerous times to where the hunts and those moments that really, like when I'm laying on my deathbed, I'm going to be able to recall, aren't on the days that I've shot limits of anything. It's really on those days that you struggle, that just like things aren't happening, the birds aren't there when they should be, or man, we got close and couldn't close a deal, whether that's on the dog or me, to where like there's a little bit of struggle, there's a little bit of suck you have to overcome, and then you get that one to where, man, that dog just held it right, and then you shoot a double on a covey rise, and then you get the retrieve, or that rough grouse finally gives you the shot opportunity and you're able to pay it back to the dog. Whatever, fill in the blank. Everybody that's spent time in the field with the dog has those memories, more so than just if you go out there and you shot a limit. Cool, like it's great. I'm not saying that I wouldn't have done that if I'm in your shoes by any means, but it's also, there's an element of like there are better stories out there than just the numbers. And if you don't have those moments and that interaction between bird and dog, you can shoot all the limits in the world, you're still going to get bored of it eventually if all it is shooting birds for you.
At some point, you can't shoot more than a limit legally. And if you're shooting a limit every time you go, where do you go from there?
Exactly.
It's you either start breaking the law or you start finding something else in the experience. I get it. The guys who pack up and go on a trip somewhere, go to South Dakota for a week. You want to have good days. You don't want to pack all your stuff up and drive 25 hours.
For one bird a week.
For one bird. You'd like to shoot some birds. I get that. But there's got to be something else in it that you're enjoying, whether it's the people you're with, whether it's walking that type of country. I love that country in the Midwest. It's just beautiful. There got to be a few birds. If you go out there and don't find any birds all week, it's hard to say you had fun. Hopefully the guys you're with are fun to be around because that's all you're going to bring home. But, day in, day out, if you're not having fun, you're doing something wrong. And, change your perspective a little bit. And
what I find interesting is that I'm trying to figure out words to describe this or label it or something. I guess it doesn't really matter, but I've been trying to like in my head figure out how to convey this to me. Like from afar, it seems like the people that first start into this to where they're lacking knowledge, but they have exponentially more fun than all of us because everything's new. It's all the first. It's you get to see the dog point on the first one. Oh, the first bird shot, the
Yeah.
first everything. You're having fun, and then it's like when their knowledge and experience rises, that fun tends to fall down, and whether it's becomes part of your business because it's business, or it just becomes part of the expectation
Yeah.
and it's built in. It seems like the people that have been doing it for a while, it's like we've kind of lost why we do it or what we enjoyed about it. So it's like it seems like there's a trade-off. The more knowledge and experience you gain in it, maybe the less enjoyment or it takes even more to enjoy it.
I think you're right. People who are new to it and don't have a lot of knowledge and experience, the newness is where the fun is. It's new experiences tend to light up something in your brain. I don't know if it's dopamine shots or whatever, but it's something in your brain that lights up when something's new. And the more they do it, the more they learn. The more they learn what's possible. And so then they start thinking, well, I didn't realize you could do this. I didn't realize you could do it this many times. I didn't realize it could go this well. They start thinking in terms of more and better. How do I do more of this? How do I do this better? And it just kind of becomes a pursuit. And that's, people are wired that way. Most people are wired that way.
Yeah.
And it's to some degree, it's good because as a species, it keeps us progressing.
Striving for more.
Yeah. I mean, that's where innovation comes from. It's people looking for better ways to do things. But in terms of how you spend your spare time, what you don't have that much spare time in a day after work and family and everything else. You got a precious amount of spare time. Do you want to spend it trying to get more and better at everything you do, or do you want to have fun? I mean, do you want to go out there and the whole time you're out there, you're smiling, you're laughing, you're grinning, you have a good feeling, you get home and you're still feeling good. I was telling you about last week where I loaded all my stuff up and left my vest at home. And I got out of the truck looking around for my vest and it's not there. And I was like, I left it at home. And I almost came home. And I was like, why am I going to do that? I think I can piece this together. I think I got enough here to do this. And I went out and shot a couple of woodchuck and had a great day. And it was because I didn't feel like I had to have everything that's in my vest with me to have a good time. We just went out and no expectations. Let's just go see what happens. We're going to give it a try and see what happens. And had a great day. And hopefully every day starts to become like that. Let's just go see what happens today. We have an objective here, which is to go out with the dogs and find birds. If we find them, shoot some. But I have days where I can't hit the ground in front of me for whatever reason. Can't hit anything. And there still needs to be some fun in that day. And I think if I'm not expecting to hit everything I shoot at or some certain percentage of what I shoot at, that allows that fun little room to slide in there and settle in.
And it's just interesting how, we kind of throughout this episode, we really were talking about the mindset of going out and training our dogs. And now we're just talking about our mindset in general in life. This goes beyond dog training and hunting. It really is just stop putting unnecessary expectations. And I mean, I'm speaking to myself more so than anybody else, because anybody that's listening to this, I'm a very goal driven kind of person to where it's like, all right, knock that out. What's the next challenge? What's the next one? Let's keep getting better. But, here lately I have found myself to where I want to get back to where just going out and spending time with my dogs on the side of a mountain is good enough for me again. And it's not so much that, how many flushes, how many of that, because, I can talk about this and where like, I don't have to shoot a limit to have fun, but like, again, just expectations, they're almost a dirty word when it comes to something that you're supposed to just let unfold in front of you, because you can't control it. And it's going to ruin your day no matter how you try and control it. you can't control it. You can't control the dog, the bird, the conditions,
Mm-hmm.
nothing. And so, yeah, I mean, I know that we're kind of preaching, life here instead of just dog training,
Yeah.
but to me, it's all the same, like you said.
Yeah. I think this it's just part of the human condition is we're goal oriented, task oriented. That's how we get through our day. We have certain things we have to get done today or by the end of the week, and so we make checklists, and we have benchmarks that we got to hit to get to that whatever it is at the end. Um, you don't have to do that when you're hunting. Put yourself in a place where you got a shot at finding some birds. If you find some, that's great. If the dog points them, that's great. If the dog holds the point, wow, that's great. If you actually hit one, that's great too. It's too easy to get frustrated if you go out. Oh, there's no birds. This is awful. I missed everything I shot at. This is awful. And you had the chance to go out and do it. That's not awful. That's a pretty good deal. And we're lucky to be able to do these kind of things.
Well, when we talk about balance, as we kind of start trying to steer this to the closing, is how do we find the right balance to where, like right now, we're still early in the year. Hunting season is starting to near the end here in the southeast, so training season is ahead of us. How do we maintain the fun? How do we go out there without any expectations, without getting too serious on our goals, but still actually have some intention and a plan for the dogs, right?
Yeah.
We're still training to a certain end or a certain level. To do that, you still have to have goals. And so we can sit here and preach, the it sounds great. Go out there without no expectations, let it unfold in front of you. But if you do that, you can say that probably makes for a poor trainer in some
Yeah.
regards.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for training purposes, you need some objective that you're working toward. Um, you're not really training if you just go turn your dogs loose in a field. Maybe if there are birds there, they'll learn a little about knocking birds and learn they can't catch them. If they're wild birds or good flying pen raised birds. Um, so yeah, if you're training, you need some goals and objectives. I think where it kind of comes undone is when you put time frames on
Yeah.
those objectives. I was telling you about my young dog who um, I really wanted to have him force fetched this past summer. I wanted him to be finished, reliable retriever by the time hunting season opened. And I started plenty early enough, I thought. And, left him with Mo late summer. And it just didn't happen. He's a fairly reliable retriever now, but he's not 100% anywhere close to it. He just wasn't quite finished by the time the season opened. And so we'll finish in the spring.
Yeah.
And if I'm still sitting there next opening day and he's still not retrieving reliably, maybe it's not in the cards for that dog. I don't know. I'd like to have him, but he's such a sweet dog, and he is really, really good on birds. And I'm not going to jeopardize how good he is on birds by trying to force him to bring them back to me. That's how you get yourself in trouble. All of a sudden he's not liking birds anymore because you're making him do something he doesn't want to do. He'll get there. I'm not worried about him. It just takes some dogs longer than others, and just have your goals and objectives, but don't be so set on accomplishing them by a certain date that you start doing things you shouldn't be doing to try to make it happen, because that's one sure way of guaranteeing that it won't. As people, that's how we approach everything. We've got an event or something at work that needs doing. We know when that has to be done by, or when that event is, and so we divvy up all the tasks we need to do, set it out a schedule, and start working toward it. If we start getting behind, what do? We throw more people at it, or we work longer hours, and that you can't do that with dog training. I mean, trying to work more hours on it is probably going to do more harm than good. The dogs can only absorb so much in a certain time frame. You can't go, oh, well, season's getting ready to open, I better start putting in 8 hours a day trying to get. No, that ain't gonna fix it.
No, especially not on dogs. It is that is definitely a balancing act, but something that you learn really quickly on your first dog for most people if you're training that dog is you learn that you're not overcoming confusion or getting making strides with your dog by putting in more time, right? Like it truly has to be the correct setup, the correct approach, intentionality behind it to where quality really is more than
Yeah.
quantity of just reps. And you learn real quick that, like, because if not, then you could go out there and for 8 hours on a force fetch table be done. And, if you do a couple 8 hour shifts, you're done. It's not how
Mm-mm.
dogs learn. You're going to see that real quick. They're going to shut down on you real quick. There's just no way to do that. So yeah, our mindset is completely different than the dogs in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. 5 or 10 minutes, 15 minutes maybe at a time over days and weeks and months is what's going to get you that dog that you're looking
Hmm.
for. It's not 8 hours in a day, 8 hours in a weekend, even. You can't cram it in to a dog like that.
Yeah.
So just, yeah, don't don't get so hell bent on having something done by a certain date that you're willing to do whatever it takes to get, because you're just going to undo a lot of hard work that you probably already put in on that dog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap this up, this may sound kind of silly, but this is something that again, I can't recall. I heard it on a podcast or read it somewhere. To start when you're having a conversation with somebody, just look at them at the very end and say, "What's a question that I should have asked you that I didn't?"
I don't know. I think we covered a lot of stuff here. I think the have fun part, you did ask that, well, we talked about it. And I think that's the most important thing.
That's the exclamation
I
point.
think that's it. It just should be fun. And if it's not fun, take a step back and ask yourself, why am I not having fun here? Is it because of my expectations? What's going wrong that's causing me to not have fun? Is that something you can change? You're making choices here. Just make a different choice. Choose to have fun. Choose to not let this be so important to you that you just can't have fun unless this happens. Um, it's too special a thing. And if this truly is your passion, man, it ought to be fun. It
Hmm.
really ought to be fun.
Yeah. It's words I'm trying to get back to, and I call it keeping the soul. Keep the
Yeah,
soul of what we're in this for
yeah,
and to do. And I'm not going to say it's a New Year's resolution, but it was something that I am trying to focus on this year is don't take everything as serious, and everything doesn't have to be about
yeah,
productivity or taking the next step, but truly enjoy it, because I mean the dogs deserve that. If for any other reason, the dogs deserve for you to just go out there and have fun with them, and that's what I'm trying to keep at the forefront of my mind this year. So we'll see how that develops throughout this year,
yeah.
but I'm trying to get to next hunting season with less expectations, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
And you'd be surprised how much further you might get with fewer expectations. Um, you'll show up very pleased at what's happened. I think and I still have certain expectations for myself and my dogs, and sometimes they go well, and sometimes they don't. Um, Sometimes I can meet them, and maybe sometimes not. But um, if you just kind of focus on making it fun and realizing that whatever happened is not that big a deal in the grand scheme, it's something we can fix this, we can work on it. Um, there's no. We were talking about this before we got started. There's If you want to be competent at something or good at something, there's no shortcut. I mean, you just have to put in the time. You have to put in the repetitions, and the only way you're going to mentally be able to make it through a lot of time and repetitions is if you just kind of taking it as it comes. Focus on having fun. Focus on seeing what happens today. Not I'm going to make this happen today. Focus on what happens today, and if something didn't go right, step back and go, okay, what went wrong here? What do we need to tweak to get it right? Don't just get mad that it didn't go wrong. We're people. It's hard not to get mad and frustrated sometimes when it doesn't go well. But
Yeah.
take a step back and Say, all right, this is just one day in the process. This is one day getting me closer to being competent or where I want to be in this pursuit.
I think some people would refer to that as perspective.
Yeah.
Just game perspective.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it, Mark. I appreciate you kind of taking the time and having me down to talk dogs for a little bit. Glad we were able to finally make it happen. And I know we referenced a couple articles that you wrote, and I'll have the links in the show notes. But is there other places or other articles you've written that somebody might, if they're interested, be able to find or locate?
Yeah, they're floating around out there. I'm not what you would call a prolific writer. Maybe 3 or 4 pieces a year show up in different magazines. Shooting Sportsman, I think, carried that Ben Williams article, and I've done some for them. Quail Unlimited magazine, I tend to write a little more for them than others. I say Quail Unlimited, Quail Forever Journal, sorry.
You've just been in this too long.
Yeah. I used to write for Quail Unlimited's magazine. You did a column for them years and years ago, so you can edit that part out.
well, real quick, what about the South Carolina Quail Initiative?
The Bob White Initiative,
Yeah.
I love doing that. I've been volunteering for that for since before they even had a name for that. And we're working very hard to restore wild Bob White populations here in South Carolina. And anybody who lives in the state and wants to help out, jump on Facebook or Instagram, SC Bob Whites. Let us know you want to help. We'll try to get you plugged in. Our website is scbobwhites.org, and we're in the middle of a website redesign, so it's kind of dated. The one that's out there is kind of dated, but hopefully in the next few weeks or months, we're going to have a new one up that's a little more useful. But we've been making progress. We've watched the trend go down for years and years. And the year after we started this initiative, populations started turning back up again for the first time in 30, 40 years. Yeah. So it's making a difference. We just need to get more habitat on more land, public and private. And love hunting Bob Whites. It's one of my favorite things in the world to do. And love hunting them in South Carolina. So hopefully we're going to get more and more of them on the landscape in coming years.
Well, Mark, I appreciate it. We'll go ahead and wrap this up, and maybe next time we'll actually get to share some time out in the field next time I come through South Carolina, or maybe get Lauren and Mo involved, and we kind of have another round table at some point. But I appreciate the life talk more so than just even the dog talk.
Dogs are life for some of us, right?
Right.
Yeah. I enjoyed it, Nick. Thank you so much.